I was driving back to my dorm after a weekend at my parents' house, exhausted but determined to push through the last stretch of highway. It was just past midnight, and the roads were nearly empty. Only the occasional headlights of a distant truck reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. I had an energy drink in the cup holder and my playlist on low, but my eyelids were getting heavier by the minute. When I saw the glowing sign of a gas station ahead, I figured it was a good excuse to stretch my legs and refill my tank before the final hour of my drive. It was one of those older stations, the kind with a single flickering light over the pumps, and a small convenience store that looked frozen in time. As I pulled in, I noticed there was only one other car, a battered dark sedan parked off to the side, facing the trees behind the station. No one was inside, and I didn't see anyone around, but the sight of it made me uneasy for reasons I couldn't quite pin down. I shook off the feeling and got out of my car, the cold air jolting me awake. The gas station was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the hum of the pump and the faint buzz of the fluorescent light overhead. Inside the store, the cashier, a tired-looking man in his 40s, sat behind the counter staring at his phone. Everything about the place felt still. I had just finished filling up when I heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. A woman, mid-30s maybe, emerged from the shadows near the store, walking straight toward my car. She was tall and thin, with messy blonde hair that stuck to her damp face, and her wide eyes darted around like she expected someone to grab her at any second. My instinct told me to get in my car and lock the doors, but before I could move, she reached my driver's side window and tapped on it with trembling fingers. "Please," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I need help. Someone is—" She cut herself off, her breath hitching as if she was afraid to say it out loud. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave. I hadn't even processed what she was asking, but everything about the situation felt wrong. My fingers hovered over the lock button, hesitating. If she was in danger, driving away meant leaving her behind. But if this was a setup, opening my door could be the worst mistake I ever made. My heart pounded as I tried to decide, but before I could react, her eyes widened in terror. She took a shaky step back, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's here." My stomach dropped. I didn't know who she meant, but the raw fear in her voice sent adrenaline surging through me. My first instinct was to turn and look, but some part of me, some deep primal part, told me not to. Instead, I kept my eyes locked on her, searching her face for any sign that this was some elaborate trick. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, and she kept shifting on her feet like she was trying to decide whether to run or stay. "Please," she whispered again, her voice almost breaking. "I don't have anywhere else to go." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My brain was at war with itself. Every self-preservation instinct was screaming at me to drive away. But there was something else too, something harder to ignore. What if she was telling the truth? What if she was just a woman in danger begging for help, and I was the only person around? I swallowed hard and risked a glance toward the gas station. The cashier was still behind the counter, oblivious. The old sedan was exactly where it had been, untouched. Nothing looked out of place. But that didn't mean she was lying. I licked my lips, forcing myself to speak, my voice hoarse from nerves. "Who's after you?" My words came out quieter than I intended, like I was afraid of being overheard. The woman took a shaky breath, her fingers twitching at her sides. "I don't know," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "But he's been following me since the last town. I stopped here to hide, but I think he saw me." She turned her head slightly, scanning the lot, and that's when I saw it. Just beyond the glow of the overhead lights, a figure stood near the edge of the woods. My pulse slammed against my ribs. He wasn't moving, wasn't even trying to hide. Just standing there, watching. The distance made it hard to make out details, but I could see enough. A dark hoodie, the faint outline of a face. He was tall, taller than me, taller than her. I don't know how long he had been standing there, but the second I noticed him, something changed, like he could tell. His head tilted slightly, and I swear I could feel the weight of his gaze, pressing down on me like something tangible. I sucked in a sharp breath, my skin crawling. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the eerie silence of the gas station. The woman was trembling now, her eyes locked onto the figure like a rabbit caught in a predator's sights. I wanted to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe he was just another traveler passing through. But something about the way he stood there, so still, so patient, sent ice crawling up my spine. He wasn't lost. He wasn't waiting for someone. He was here for her. I can take you somewhere," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. My fingers fumbled to unlock the door, but before I could reach for the handle, she jerked back. "No," she whispered, shaking her head so fast her hair whipped around her face. "He'll follow us. He always follows." The words sent a sick twist through my stomach. Always? My brain struggled to make sense of it. Was she being stalked? Was this some kind of domestic situation gone horribly wrong? I had no idea what I was stepping into, but I knew one thing: I couldn't just leave her here. My eyes darted back to the figure, and that's when I realized something that made my breath hitch. He had moved. Not much, just a step closer, but it was enough. Enough to make my skin prickle. Enough to confirm that he was watching our every move. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to think. If I got in the car and drove off, what then? Would he follow us onto the highway? Would he disappear the second I called the police, leaving her stranded with no proof he was ever here? I couldn't just drive aimlessly, hoping to outrun something I didn't understand. I needed a plan. Swallowing my fear, I turned back to the woman. "Come inside the store with me," I said. "There are cameras in there, a cashier. He won't do anything with other people around." Her lips parted, hesitation flickering across her face. But then she looked back at the figure, and whatever she saw made her decision for her. Without another word, she nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to make herself smaller. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my keys, slammed my car door shut, and started walking toward the gas station, keeping my pace steady, casual. Like nothing was wrong, like we weren't being hunted. The moment we stepped inside, the harsh fluorescent lights felt almost blinding. The gas station smelled like stale coffee and cleaning supplies, the kind of artificial safety that shouldn't have been reassuring but somehow was. The cashier barely glanced up, still engrossed in his phone. I exhaled, forcing my hands to stay steady as I grabbed a random snack from a shelf, trying to look casual. The woman hovered near the doorway, her fingers digging into the fabric of her jacket. "He's still out there," she murmured, her voice almost lost under the hum of the fridge coolers. I didn't want to check, but I did. Through the smudged glass of the front window I could see him, closer now, standing near the pump where my car had been. The sick feeling in my stomach deepened. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was waiting. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand and pointed at the woman beside me. Not at me. At her. I swallowed hard and turned back to the cashier, who was still oblivious. My pulse pounded. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Can I use your phone? Mine's dead." It wasn't, but I needed a reason to stay inside. To stall. The cashier sighed like I was inconveniencing him and reached under the counter, sliding a dusty landline toward me. My fingers were cold as I dialed 911. The woman beside me stayed silent, barely breathing, but I could feel the tension rolling off her in waves. The operator picked up, her voice a distant echo in my ear. I gave them the location, my words clipped, urgent. "There's a man outside," I said, risking another glance. But when I looked again, he was gone. The lot was empty. Just my car, the gas pump, and the quiet stretch of road beyond. The woman made a strangled noise, somewhere between relief and dread. I turned to her, but she was already stepping back, shaking her head. "He won't be there when they come," she whispered. "He never is." The way she said it sent a chill through me, but before I could ask what she meant, she turned and rushed out the back door of the store, disappearing into the night. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, found nothing. No strange man, no old sedan. Just me, alone, trying to explain a story that already sounded like a lie. And the worst part? A week later, I stopped at that same station on my way home. The cashier recognized me, gave me a weird look. "Thought you weren't coming back," he said. "After last time?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He blinked. "You don't remember? You came in late one night, real freaked out. Kept saying someone was following you." I started working the night shift at the gas station about 6 months ago. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills and, honestly, I didn't mind the quiet. The station was on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that mostly saw truckers, late-night travelers, and the occasional local grabbing cigarettes or a six-pack before heading home. My shifts were long but predictable, restocking shelves, sweeping the floors, and killing time behind the counter with my phone. It was boring, but at least it was safe. Or at least, I thought it was. The first time I noticed the car, I didn't think much of it. A dark sedan, maybe a Honda or a Toyota, parked across the street just outside the glow of the streetlights. It wasn't uncommon for people to pull over there, maybe to check their phones or take a break before continuing their drive. But this car never moved. Hours passed, my shift dragged on, and every time I looked out the window, it was still there. No one got out. No one went inside the small diner next door. Just sitting there, watching. I tried to brush it off, but something about it gnawed at me. The next night when I showed up for work, the car was already there. Same spot. Same dark silhouette behind the wheel. I kept glancing at it throughout my shift, but the driver never left. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe someone working nearby on a night shift like me. But by the third night in a row, my gut told me otherwise. That's when I noticed the flicker of a phone screen inside the car. Whoever was inside wasn't just sitting there. They were watching me. That night, I stepped outside during a slow hour, pretending to take out the trash. The air was cold, biting at my skin as I walked toward the dumpster. I made sure to glance across the street, trying to get a better look. The car was still running, engine humming so quietly I barely noticed it. And then, right as I turned back toward the station, I saw it. The faint glow of a camera flash from inside the car. They were taking pictures of me. I went back inside, my hands clammy despite the cold. I tried to act normal, like I hadn't noticed, but my mind was racing. Why would someone be taking pictures of me? Was it just some creep, or was there something more to it? I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? "Hey, there's a car parked across the street, and I think the driver is taking pictures of me." They'd probably just tell me to ignore it unless the person actually did something. So I tried to do just that. Ignore it. But it wasn't easy. The next night I parked my car behind the building instead of in my usual spot out front. I didn't want them knowing which car was mine. When I stepped inside the station, I resisted the urge to check the street right away, but after about 10 minutes I finally gave in. The car was there again. But this time, something was different. The driver's side door was open, and the silhouette was gone. My stomach dropped. I scanned the parking lot, the diner next door, even the empty road stretching into the distance. No sign of him. He could be anywhere. A customer came in a few minutes later, a middle-aged guy with a flannel jacket and a tired face. I forced myself to act normal as I rang him up. "Hey, I said casually. "You didn't see anyone outside, did you?" He looked at me, a little confused. "Just my truck." "Why?" I hesitated. "No reason. Just thought I saw something." As soon as he left, I locked the doors. We weren't technically supposed to. Corporate policy said we had to stay open 24/7. But I didn't care. If someone wanted gas, they could pay at the pump. An hour passed, then 2. The car was still there, but the driver never came back. Around 3 a.m., I started to think maybe he'd left. Maybe I'd just missed him getting back into the car and driving off. But then, just as I was starting to relax, something moved in the corner of my vision. A figure, stepping out from the shadows near the dumpster. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't across the street anymore. He was here. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed above me, too bright, making me feel exposed. The man stood just outside the glow of the parking lot lights, barely more than a dark shape. I couldn't see his face, but I could tell he was watching me. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I reached under the counter, feeling for the small metal baseball bat we kept there. Not exactly company policy, but the night shift had its risks. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he lifted something. A phone. He raised it, aimed it at me, and the screen flashed. Another photo. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to breathe, my fingers tightening around the bat's handle. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What if he left before they got here? What if they showed up, found nothing, and wrote me off as paranoid? But then, as if sensing my hesitation, the man took a step forward. That broke me. I grabbed my phone with my free hand and dialed 911, keeping my eyes locked on the shadowy figure outside. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. "There's a man outside my gas station. He's been watching me for days. He's taking pictures." The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth, like something out of a bad horror movie. The dispatcher asked for my location and told me an officer would be on the way. I stayed on the line, staring through the glass, waiting for him to make another move. But he didn't. The moment I called, he took one last photo, then turned and strode back to his car. He moved like he had all the time in the world, like he wanted me to see him leaving. He got in, shut the door, and pulled away slowly, headlights off, vanishing into the night. The cop showed up 15 minutes later, but by then, there was nothing to see. Just an empty parking lot, a paranoid gas station attendant, and the lingering feeling that I'd just been marked for something I didn't understand. The officer took my statement, but I could tell he wasn't too concerned. He asked if I had security cameras, and I pointed to the old, barely functional ones hanging in the corners. "Might not get much from those," he muttered, jotting something down in his notebook. I told him about the car, the photos, the fact that the guy had been watching me for days. He nodded, but I could see it in his face. He thought I was just some jittery night shift worker spooked by a random weirdo. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, before heading back to his cruiser. And that was that. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I just sat at my kitchen table, my stomach churning, trying to make sense of it. Why me? I wasn't anyone special. Just some guy working a dead-end job at a gas station. What was the point of taking those pictures? I thought about calling out of work, maybe even quitting altogether. But I needed the money. So against my better judgment, I showed up for my next shift. And the one after that. For a while, nothing happened. The car didn't come back. The man never showed up again. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that maybe he'd just been messing with me for some twisted reason and moved on to someone else. Weeks passed. I almost believed it. But then, one night, I got home, threw my jacket on the couch, and went to grab a beer from the fridge. That's when I saw it. A single envelope on my kitchen table. My door had been locked, I was sure of it. My windows too. But there it was, right in the center of the table, like someone had carefully placed it there, knowing I would find it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 3 photographs. The first was of me behind the gas station counter, staring warily out the window. The second was of me taking out the trash that night by the dumpster, my breath visible in the cold air. The third, my stomach lurched. The third was of me sleeping in my bed. Close up. My face barely inches from the camera lens. I don't know how he got inside. I don't know when he took that picture, but I do know one thing. Whoever he wasn't just watching me at work. He was watching me everywhere. I was driving through the back roads of Kentucky late one evening, heading home after visiting my parents. It was one of those stretches of highway where the radio turns to static, and the only light comes from the moon and the glow of your own headlights. I wasn't in a rush, just enjoying the solitude, when my dashboard lit up with a warning: low tire pressure. I cursed under my breath. I had checked my tires before leaving, but the road had been rough, full of cracks and loose gravel. I figured I'd better pull over somewhere safe before it got worse. About 10 minutes later, I spotted an old gas station, one of those forgotten places with a single flickering sign and a rusty pump. It looked like something out of a horror movie, but I didn't have much choice. The place was empty, no other cars, no clerk inside, just a dimly lit interior and a buzzing neon open sign. I pulled up near the air pump and got out, stretching my legs before crouching down to inspect my tires. The rear driver's side one looked lower than the rest, but nothing catastrophic. Still, I didn't want to take any chances. As I was unscrewing the cap to check the pressure, a voice cut through the silence. "Got a flat?" It startled me, and I turned to see a man standing just a few feet away. I hadn't heard him walk up. He was tall, maybe late 40s, with rough hands and a face that looked like it had seen too many years in the sun. He wore a grease-stained jacket, the kind mechanics wear, but there was no name tag, no logo, just gray eyes that seemed to study me a little too closely. I nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, just a low tire. I think I can handle it." I expected him to leave it at that, but he didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I'm a mechanic," he said, as if that was supposed to put me at ease. "Let me take a look. Might be more serious than you think." I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I've got it under control." I wasn't trying to be rude, but something about him unsettled me. Maybe it was the way he had appeared so suddenly, or how he kept looking past me, at my car, at the road behind us, as if checking for something. I turned back to my tire, hoping that would be enough to end the conversation. But he didn't take the hint. Instead, he crouched beside me, close enough that I could smell the oil and cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. "These roads chew up tires," he said, tapping my wheel with his knuckle. "You sure it's just low pressure? Sometimes it's a slow leak. Might go flat on you 10 miles down the road." His voice was casual, almost friendly, but there was something off, a little too insistent, like he wanted me to doubt myself. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how alone we were. The gas station sat at the edge of a tree line, the only building for miles. No cars had passed since I pulled in. The place didn't even have security cameras, not that I could see. The neon open sign flickered weakly, but inside, the store was dark. No clerk, no movement. Was this place even in business? "Really, man, I'm good," I said, stepping back toward my driver's side door. But before I could reach it, he moved too, just enough to block my path. Not obviously, not aggressively, but deliberately. He smiled, lifting his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "Relax, buddy. I'm just trying to help." My heartbeat picked up. Relax. Don't overreact. Maybe he was just one of those overly helpful types, the kind that doesn't take a hint. But every instinct in me was screaming that something was wrong. I glanced at my tire again. Was it really worth standing here arguing? I just needed to get back in my car and go. I took a slow breath and forced a chuckle. Yeah, I get it, man. I just don't want to waste your time. I sidestepped, moving toward my door handle. He mirrored me. Not aggressively, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I knew it wasn't an accident. He wasn't letting me leave. A tightness crept into my chest. The air felt different now, charged with something I couldn't quite name. My brain scrambled for options. If I got into my car fast enough, could I lock the doors before he reacted? Could I pull away before he did? Whatever it was he was planning? My keys were already in my pocket. If I moved fast, maybe… You know, he said suddenly, cutting into my thoughts. There's a better pump behind the station. Works faster. I can take you there. His tone was light, casual, but his eyes stayed locked on me. I felt my stomach drop. Behind the station? The one with no lights, no cameras, nothing but trees? There was no damn way. I forced a tight smile, shaking my head. Nah, I think I'll just top it off here. I moved faster this time, gripping my door handle ready to yank it open. His hand shot out, pressing against the frame. Not gripping, not slamming the door shut, just resting there. A small barrier. A message. His smile hadn't faded, but something in his expression shifted, like he was testing me, seeing how I'd react. Come on, man, he said, voice still light, but with an edge now. Just trying to do you a favor. Everything inside me was screaming to get the hell out of there. I didn't want to find out what happened if I kept humoring him. So I laughed, trying to keep my voice steady. I get it. You're being nice, but I really gotta hit the road. I moved like I was just adjusting my stance, but at the same time, I pulled my keys from my pocket, clicking the unlock button. The sound echoed in the quiet. For a second, he just stood there. Then, slowly, he pulled his hand away. But he didn't step back. He just watched. Studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. My fingers tightened around my keys as I yanked open the door and slid in, slamming it shut. My hands were shaking. I locked the doors the second I was inside. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisting it so fast my fingers fumbled. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. He still hadn't moved. Just stood there, staring at me, his face unreadable in the glow of my dashboard lights. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I threw the car into reverse, tires kicking up dust as I backed out fast. My heart pounded as I turned toward the road, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, motionless, watching me go. The second my tires hit the pavement, I floored it. The gas station disappeared in my rear view, swallowed by the night. My hands were clenched so tight around the wheel that my knuckles ached. I kept expecting to see headlights behind me, some beat-up truck speeding after me, but the road stayed empty. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next town, pulling into a well-lit parking lot of a busy diner. My hands were still shaking as I sat there, breathing hard, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. What the hell had just happened? Maybe he was just a weird, pushy guy. Maybe I was overreacting. Or maybe I had just avoided something much, much worse. I was driving home after visiting my sister in another state, a 7-hour stretch of highway cutting through endless dark fields. It was past midnight, and my eyes felt heavy, the road signs blurring together. I had promised myself I wouldn't stop until I reached home, but my bladder had other plans. I spotted a gas station off the next exit, one of those small, dimly lit places with only a single pump and a flickering neon sign. The lot was empty except for an old pickup truck parked near the entrance. I hesitated, but I didn't have a choice. Inside, the convenience store smelled like stale coffee and cleaning solution. The cashier, a skinny man in a faded flannel, barely glanced up from his phone when I asked where the restroom was. "Back left," he mumbled. The hallway leading to the restrooms was narrow and poorly lit, the buzzing fluorescent light overhead casting an eerie, flickering glow. The women's restroom door had a dent in it, and the lock was scratched like someone had clawed at it. I ignored the unease crawling up my spine and stepped inside. The restroom was as bad as I expected. Gray tile floor with water stains, a single sink with a cracked mirror, and 2 stalls, one of which was out of order. I chose the other, locking the door behind me and trying not to touch anything more than necessary. As I relieved myself, I heard the outer restroom door creak open. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, entered the room. The door clicked shut, and then, click. The sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. Someone had just locked the main door from the inside. I cleared my throat. Sorry, I'll be out in a second." No response. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, the sound of footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, pacing. Back and forth outside my stall. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I tried again, my voice shaking slightly. The pacing stopped, right outside my door. Whoever was out there wasn't just another late-night traveler. They weren't in here to use the restroom. I stayed completely still, my breath caught in my throat. The air in the restroom felt heavier, like the walls had closed in around me. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a drunk person. Maybe they were just messing around. But then, the pacing started again, slow and deliberate. The soft scuff of shoes dragging across the grimy tiles. They weren't leaving. They weren't speaking. They were just there. I reached for my phone in my jacket pocket, but the moment I shifted, the footsteps stopped. I could feel them standing just inches from my stall door, listening. My fingers fumbled as I tried to unlock my screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had no signal. Of course. Middle of nowhere, run-down gas station, and I was completely alone. My eyes darted to the gap beneath the stall door. A pair of boots stood directly in front of it, worn leather, covered in dirt. I swallowed hard. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. "Is everything okay?" Still nothing. My skin prickled with cold dread. I glanced around the tiny stall, looking for something, anything I could use as a weapon. The only thing within reach was the toilet paper dispenser, bolted to the wall. I took a deep breath, trying to think. The window near the sink was too small to fit through, and the door was locked from the inside. My only way out was past whoever was standing out there. And then, the boots shifted. The person bent down slightly, just enough for me to see a sliver of their face through the stall gap. A pale, wide eye peered in at me, unblinking. My stomach turned to ice. I barely had time to react before they straightened up again, their fingers trailing over the stall door, tapping. Light, rhythmic taps, like they were playing a game. I felt like I was suffocating. The air in the stall was thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. My fingers curled into fists as I pressed myself against the back of the stall, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was on the other side of that door. The tapping continued, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like they were waiting for me to react. I had to get out. I forced myself to move, shifting my weight as quietly as possible. The moment I did, the tapping stopped. My breath hitched. Then, the person outside let out a low, wheezing chuckle. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill straight through me. It sounded wrong, like they were enjoying this, like they had done this before. I reached for the lock on my stall, hesitating. If I unlocked it, I'd have to move fast. But what if they were waiting for that exact moment? I needed a distraction. My eyes darted toward the toilet paper dispenser. I ripped a wad of paper and threw it toward the gap beneath the door, hoping it would at least make them flinch. Nothing. No movement. But then, just as I thought maybe they had backed away, I heard the soft scrape of metal. A blade. The unmistakable sound of a knife being drawn against the door. Panic surged through me. My only option was to run. Without thinking, I slammed my foot against the stall door as hard as I could. It burst open with a loud crack, the force knocking the figure back. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. I just ran. My sneakers skidded against the tile as I bolted toward the sink, my hands fumbling desperately for anything to defend myself. But as I reached the door, my stomach dropped. It was still locked. I twisted the doorknob frantically, my fingers slipping with sweat. Locked. Of course, it was still locked. Behind me, I heard the heavy shuffle of boots as the person regained their footing. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I yanked at the lock, trying to slide it open, but my hands were shaking too much. A slow, deliberate step behind me. Then another. They weren't rushing. They were enjoying this. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the soap dispenser from the sink, a cheap plastic thing barely hanging onto the wall, and hurled it backward without looking. It smacked against something, someone, and a guttural grunt followed. The split second of distraction was enough. My fingers finally found the lock and I yanked it open. The door swung wide, and I stumbled out into the dimly lit hallway, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. The gas station was silent. The cashier was gone. The pickup truck outside was gone. It was like the place had been abandoned in the last 5 minutes. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I sprinted to my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands fumbled with my keys, dropping them once, twice, before I finally managed to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, slammed the locks down, and started the engine. As I sped out of the lot, my headlights swept over the bathroom entrance. The door was still open. The flickering light cast long shadows against the walls, but no one was there. Just the empty hallway, silent and still. I didn't stop driving until I reached home, and even then, I didn't sleep that night. I never found out who was in that restroom with me. I don't know what they wanted or why they didn't chase me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The slow, rhythmic tapping against the door. I was never the type to panic. I grew up in the Midwest, where long stretches of highway and empty landscapes were just a part of life. But that night, stranded on Route 19 with an empty gas tank, something about the silence felt wrong. It was past midnight, and the road was deserted. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was at least 20 miles away. I cursed myself for not checking the gas gauge earlier. The night was cold, the air heavy with the scent of damp asphalt, and my only company was the endless darkness pressing in on all sides. After what felt like an hour, I saw headlights in the distance. Relief washed over me as the car slowed down. A dark pickup, older but well-maintained. The driver rolled down his window and I got a good look at him. He was in his late 40s, wiry, with sun-creased skin, and a trucker cap pulled low over his eyes. "Out of gas?" he asked, his voice rough, like he had been smoking since childhood. I nodded, explaining my situation. He scratched his chin, glancing down the road before gesturing to the passenger seat. "Nearest station's a few miles up. Hop in." I hesitated for a second, but what choice did I have? I climbed in, the door shutting with a heavy thunk. The first few minutes were quiet, just the hum of the tires against the pavement. "Not many folks take this road at night," the man said after a while, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Dangerous?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Not unless you make it. That should have been my first red flag, but I forced a chuckle and looked out the window. The headlights illuminated the trees lining the road, their skeletal branches reaching out like fingers. Then I noticed something strange. We had turned off the highway. I hadn't seen a sign for a gas station. The road was narrower now, cracked and uneven, the kind of road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. "We almost there?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. The man nodded. "Just up ahead." A few minutes later I saw it. A run-down gas station barely visible in the dim light. The overhead sign was missing half its letters, and the single pump looked ancient, rusted at the edges. There were no other cars, no lights inside. It looked abandoned. My stomach tightened. "Are you sure this place is open?" I asked. The man didn't answer right away. He pulled into the lot, put the truck in park, then turned to look at me. "Go check." His tone was flat, unreadable. My hands were already sweating. I glanced at the station again, then back at him. Every instinct screamed that I had just made a very bad mistake. I forced a tight-lipped smile and reached for the door handle, my fingers slick with sweat. As I stepped out, the air felt colder, heavier. The gas station was completely still. No buzzing lights, no hum of a refrigerator inside. Just silence. My boots crunched against the gravel as I approached the pump. Up close, it was even worse than I thought. The hose was cracked, the screen where you'd swipe your card was shattered, and the whole thing had the eerie look of something long forgotten. My chest tightened. There was no gas here. I turned back to the truck, ready to tell the man it was a bust, but he was already out of the vehicle, standing by the hood, watching me. The dim light from the truck's headlights cast long shadows across the lot, making his silhouette stretch unnaturally across the ground. My stomach twisted. He wasn't moving toward the station. He wasn't checking the pump himself. He was just standing there, waiting for something. I glanced at the road we'd come from. The darkness beyond the lot felt impenetrable, like if I ran into it I might never find my way out. "Doesn't look like it's working," I said, keeping my voice steady. The man tilted his head slightly as if considering something. "Yeah, figured." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "Figured?" My pulse pounded in my ears. "Well, maybe there's another station back near the highway," I said, taking a careful step backward. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved, slow, deliberate, toward his pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. My body acted before my mind caught up. I turned and bolted. I heard his footsteps behind me, fast and heavy on the gravel. My boots slipped on loose stones, but I didn't stop. I aimed for the side of the station, hoping for a back exit, a hiding spot, anything. My heart slammed against my ribs as I rounded the corner, and that's when I saw it. An old rusted-out car parked behind the building. But it wasn't the car that made me stop. It was the door hanging open, the shattered glass on the ground, and the dark stain on the driver's seat. Someone else had been here before me, and they hadn't left on their own. A sickening realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just some abandoned gas station. It was a trap. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts as I ducked behind the rusted car, pressing myself against the cold metal. The footsteps behind me slowed, crunching deliberately over the gravel. He wasn't running anymore. He knew I had nowhere to go. "You should have stayed in the truck," his voice called out, casual, almost amused. My hands fumbled over the car's door handle, yanking at it desperately. Locked. Of course, it was locked. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I couldn't go back the way I came, and the station itself looked like a dead end. Then I saw it, a narrow gap between the back of the station and the tree line. If I could make it there, I might have a chance, but I'd have to move fast. I steadied myself, waited for the next sound of his boots scuffing against the gravel. Then I ran. The world blurred around me as I bolted toward the trees, the cold air burning my throat. I heard him curse, heard his footsteps pick up speed behind me. The branches tore at my arms as I forced my way into the brush, pushing forward even as the ground sloped downward. My foot caught on a root, and I went sprawling forward, my palms scraping against the dirt. I barely had time to scramble to my feet before I heard him behind me. Closer now, too close. The truck's headlights barely reached this far, but I could still make out his shape moving through the trees, a dark figure against the night. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had to keep moving. I ducked low, forcing myself deeper into the undergrowth, hoping he'd lose sight of me in the dark. The seconds stretched into eternity. My body ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. And then, silence. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I stayed frozen, my back pressed against the rough bark of a tree, my chest rising and falling in short, panicked breaths. Was he gone? Or was he just waiting? My legs were shaking, but I didn't dare move. Then, just as I started to believe I had lost him, I heard it. Not footsteps this time, but a voice. Low, steady, somewhere in the trees. "You think I don't know these woods?" My stomach dropped. He wasn't searching anymore. He was hunting. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to stay still. If I moved now, he'd hear me. The darkness around me was thick, the trees stretching high above, blocking out what little moonlight there was. I tried to slow my breathing, but every inhale felt deafening in the silence. He was close, too close. Then I heard something. Another sound, barely perceptible over the pounding in my ears. A rustling coming from deeper in the woods. My gut twisted. It wasn't him. It was something else. For a split second I thought it might be an animal. A deer, maybe. But then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps. My entire body went rigid. There was more than one person out here. My brain raced through possibilities. Was he not alone? Was this some kind of setup? And then, without warning, the sound of movement stopped. Everything went still. A suffocating kind of silence settled over the trees, thick and unnatural. I couldn't even hear the wind anymore. And that's when I realized I wasn't just being followed, I was being surrounded. Panic surged through me like electricity. I had to move. Now. I pushed off the tree and ran, not caring how much noise I made anymore. Branches snapped against my arms, my feet barely finding stable ground as I stumbled through the dark. The sound of pursuit exploded behind me. Footsteps, heavy and fast, too many to count. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Then, up ahead, I saw it. The faintest glow of headlights. The road. My truck. I poured every last ounce of energy into my legs, sprinting toward the light. I didn't stop when I hit the pavement. I didn't look back. I fumbled with my keys, yanking the door open and throwing myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, gravel spitting out behind me as I tore down the highway. In my rearview mirror, the road behind me was empty. No figures, no headlights, just darkness stretching on forever. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. And even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that someone, something, is still out there, waiting. I used to work late shifts at a small diner just outside of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked the quiet drive home. Most nights I'd stop at the same gas station, a little spot off the highway with bright overhead lights and a single attendant inside, usually too busy scrolling through his phone to notice much. It always felt safe enough, until that night. That night changed everything. I pulled into the station just after midnight, exhausted but eager to get home. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed a dark SUV parked a few pumps away. It had tinted windows, the kind that made it impossible to see inside. I hesitated for a second, but then brushed it off. People sat in their cars all the time. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Maybe they were just taking a break. I told myself I was overthinking it and started fueling up. The pump clicked off, signaling a full tank, and as I reached for the nozzle, a voice behind me cut through the silence. "Hey, miss." I turned, my stomach immediately knotting. Two men stood uncomfortably close, one slightly taller than the other, both dressed in dark hoodies. Their faces were shadowed under the lights, but something about the way they stood, relaxed but deliberate, set off alarms in my head. "Hand over your keys," the taller one said, his tone flat, almost bored. I forced a shaky laugh, trying to mask the rising panic. "Sorry, what?" My fingers gripped the keys in my pocket, knuckles white. The shorter man stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of stale cigarette smoke. "You heard him," he muttered. "Keys. Now." My pulse pounded in my ears. The gas station attendant was inside, but the store's doors were locked after midnight. There was no one else around. Just me, two men, and the creeping realization that I had no way out. I took a slow step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Look, I don't have much," I said, stalling. If I gave them my keys, I'd be stranded. Worse, I had no idea what they planned to do next. The taller man sighed like I was being difficult. He pulled something from his pocket, a knife, small but sharp enough to make my stomach drop. "We don't have time for this," he muttered, stepping closer. I glanced toward the gas station window, hoping, praying, the attendant would look up. But he was still hunched over his phone, completely oblivious. I could feel the cold night air pressing in, mixing with the heat of my own panic. I needed to do something, anything, before this got worse. My car door was right there, just a few feet away. If I could get inside and lock it, but I had to act fast. I faked a shaky sigh and reached into my pocket, pretending to go for my keys. The moment their eyes followed my hand, I spun on my heel and bolted. I barely made it 2 steps before the shorter man grabbed my arm, yanking me back so hard I stumbled. "Oh, you think you're smart?" he hissed, gripping tighter. The taller one closed in, his knife glinting under the fluorescent lights. My throat went dry. This was it. No one was coming. Then, out of nowhere, tires screeched against the pavement. Headlights cut through the station, casting long shadows. A car had just pulled in, its driver stepping out, looking right at us. The moment my attackers noticed, their grip loosened just enough. I didn't think. I just wrenched free and sprinted toward the gas station door, pounding on the glass. "Hey! Help!" The attendant's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Behind me, I heard the rush of footsteps, then silence. I spun around, expecting the worst, but the 2 men were already gone, vanishing into the night like they were never there. The dark SUV that had been parked near the pumps peeled out of the lot, tires screeching as it sped onto the highway. My legs felt like jelly as I leaned against the gas station door, breathless and shaking. The driver of the car that had pulled in, a middle-aged man in a work uniform, looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer. I could barely get the words out. They tried to take my car." My voice sounded foreign to me, small and unsteady. The gas station attendant, finally realizing something was wrong, rushed to unlock the door and let me in. "Jesus," he muttered, looking out at the empty lot. "Do you want me to call the cops?" I nodded, my hands still clenched into fists, my keys digging into my palm. I hadn't even realized I was still gripping them. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, but by then, the men were long gone. The officer took my statement, nodding along as I recounted everything. "We've had a few incidents like this lately," he admitted. "They wait until someone's alone, then strike fast." His words sent a chill down my spine. If that car hadn't pulled in when it did, I don't even want to think about how this would have ended. They never caught the guys. No security cameras, no witnesses aside from me. I never went back to that gas station again. In fact, I stopped getting gas at night altogether. Even now, years later, I still flinch when I see a dark SUV parked alone, its windows too tinted to see inside. I used to think I was just paranoid, but now I know better. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. And that instinct is the only reason I made it out that night.